Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. It's Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab. If you are new here, this is something I do with my husband Chris. We take thrifted found items and we make them over and we share the process and a vision with you all, and then we resell them here locally. We have a couple retail booths at a local antique mall. So in today's video, when I'm out thrifting, I'm kind of drawn towards those little wooden stools, those little, not bar stools that have backs on them, but just the little plain simple stools. So if I can thrift them for under $10, because I can usually resell them in my area for around the $30–40 mark. So yes, perfect little, and then I try to keep the paint a little bit simple, but have a lot of fun with the top of them. So in today's video, I'm sharing with you how I paint these over, how I'm going to be using some decoupage paper, some leftover in my stash, and I'm also attempting milk paint for the first time. So that may not have gone as planned, but it's all about your finished product.
So single stools like this are something that you see in the thrift store quite often. Now, though, it all depends on what they are priced if I pick them up or not, but I definitely liked the two in the back that have that hidden detail, that all that detail down those legs, and even the plain one, you know, you can still make that pop. I'm out thrifting and I'm seeing a stool. One, it's got to be under a $10 price tag for me to put the work into it to resell it. So all these stools are, and then I loved the unique shape of them all. I love that swivel one especially. The rectangular ones are seeming to come into the thrift stores a lot. And I love the metal detail on this square one. So I'm going to start off right with taking this big heavy, this is heavy. If you had, let's pick up a vision. This is a very heavy swivel stool. I've never seen anything. I think it was like $8 at the Salvation Army, but definitely want to take it apart so I can sand it and give it the best paint job that I possibly can by taking it apart. It's not only do I want to update the wood, but I also want to give a fresh coat of paint to the hardware. Oh, the sanding, the scuff sanding of all these stools is probably the least funnest of this project. And I know you're all probably like, go out and buy a Serve Pref sander. Well, we have so many sanders in our hoard. I'm sorry, I just can't reason. But if anybody wants to send us one, go ahead. But nope, hand sanding all these spindles on these legs is how it's going to happen. On this one, there's just enough to make it almost annoying that there's just that top coat that's left behind, that if I went to do anything to this piece, it's just going to take it oddly. So I'm just going in with my BLACK+DECKER mouse sander and some 220 sandpaper and just getting whatever top coat is left behind off. Now my idea for this piece is to be staining it, so I need to get all that top coat off. It won't absorb into the wood properly, and especially around the edges of the seat also, you want to get all that top coat off or your stain will take unevenly. So here's a little bit closer look of what I'm dealing with. So there's just minimal top coat left on this piece. And then I want to take off whatever stain was on there, not to cause any problems. And it's really just sanding off very easily, but it's definitely that orangish that I'm not necessarily a fan of. But I just want to make sure that my surface, especially since this is a flat wood, flat legs, I want to make sure that they're nice and smooth. So as you see, it does have a little bit of a crack, and though it doesn't look like it's affecting it structurally, I still don't want anything that would be, I mean, that's definitely a sharp piece that somebody could catch something on. So just getting some glue in there and then clamping it down to make sure that it's going to be nice and secure and that you don't have to worry about it. Like I said, structurally, it's not making the legs come apart, but it definitely is a crack, a split, something that you don't want to leave behind. Now that the fun job of scuff sanding all these spindly legs and blowing them off with the air compressor to get all that sanding dust off, it's time to get them clean. So we're just going in with them Superclean, some hot water and a rag, and just getting all that area wiped down nice and clean, getting anything that might prevent your paint from sticking off. Now I let that tight bond do its work and sit overnight, and I'm going to be removing the clamps. I know there will be a little bit of sanding that I need to do to make sure that this is nice and smooth. I want to stain the top of this, but I'm not sure if that mark is just the way the wood is or if it is a stain that's in the wood. So just to be safe, it's just going to take a little bit of time to do, but just to be safe that I get the best finished product that I can, I'm just going to take some Clorox bleach, just Clorox bleach, a rag, and just bleach the top of this. So that way, if there's any staining that is on there, since there wasn't a lot of top coat left protecting it, it could be a stain. So that's, just pour it on, let it do its job for a minute or so, and then just rinse it off really well. But now I definitely have a nice cleaned bleach surface that was just actually ended up being a mark that was just on the wood, but like I said, it took minimal time to do this just to make sure that I had a good prepped. So now what I'm doing is I'm using the watered down antiquing wax to stain this. Yes, you can do that. Now, when I do my antiquing wax, I have been adding a spoonful to this little pickle jar container, a spoonful of the Waverly ink chalk paint. It kind of takes that goldy out and gives you more of that aged barnwood look that I am looking for. So if you're looking going, oh, this isn't quite the same color as what my watered down is, that's because I've been playing with it a little bit, and I really like putting a little bit of that ink. A little bit of that black pigment goes a long way though, guys. So don't put it, you can always add more. It's hard to take it out of this watered down mixture, but I definitely love how this bleached wood is turning out. I did not bleach the bottom of it. I didn't want to take that mark off by any means. I don't think it would have, but it's on the bottom and most of that chair base is covering that, but I did do the sides and the top. So for this project, we are going to be using our Graco sprayer. Now this does not hook up to an air compressor. The hose does need to go into a gallon of slightly watered down paint. But being able to spray all these spindles, if you have chairs you have to do, a sprayer is definitely very much a helpful tool to have. Before we can start using it, the one stool has a metal around keeping those legs stable, and this paint that we're using, the ready-to-use black onyx right off the shelf from Walmart, probably is not the best for a metal. So just going around with some Rust-Oleum paint and primer in the flat black to cover up just that metal, so we know that that metal is going to take the best. And then after that dries, then again sealing that in with a little bit of clear coat before moving it on. So we had to get this one done first so that starts to dry. And now we can get to all these legs. So starting them off with them being flipped upside down, trying to get that most surface area. You don't just want to do the top of your legs. You know, people are going to move these around. They're going to hold them. They're going to buy them from your shop. They're going to have you what else. You want to make sure that you get the whole area painted, not just the top. You buy a Graco sprayer, it comes with whatever tip it comes with. So when it comes to like that little surface area there of just hitting the spindles, the smaller the number on the tip, you can buy other tips, replacement tips, and the smaller the number is the smaller the spray area. So you see where he's still having some overspray, but not a ton of overspray. So especially when we're doing our smalls for our booth, or if you're doing a large piece of furniture, then you want a bigger spray area, or if you're painting a house, because yes, you can use these to paint a house, a shed, what have you. And so you, of course, for that, you want a little bit bigger of a spray area. So there are replacement tips that you can purchase to go with these Graco sprayers. And even my 360 True Coat one is the same way. I can replace that tip and change out tips to whatever project I'm using it on. And now that the underside is dry, we can now flip them over and get the rest of the surface area that didn't get painted with that first coat of black. And my original plan for the swivel chair was to stain it, but after I sanded it and after I bleached it, they're actually two different types of wood. So I knew that they weren't going to stain the same, but I'm like, you know what? I think a black base would be perfect for this piece. So now we need to get these sealed in now that they're dry. So using some Rust-Oleum in the clear coat and the matte finish to get all these sealed in. If you notice, we were pretty lucky that these fit on our paint boards that we use for our small. That way you can actually carry them in and out of the spray room and get all these sprayed at the same time. So I absolutely love how this seat stained. Don't you just love that barn wood, that aged wood, that ink just adds a little bit to that Waverly antiquing wax. Oh my goodness. Now the seat over time, some of the three pieces of wood have shrunk at the top here. So I did not want to glue that in. I did not want that to be seen because I wanted to keep this beautiful color that it had stained. So yes, I'm going to be giving out. The person who loves to do grain sack striping actually purchased the stencils, the JRV stencils from the Vintage Bee shop, Melissa's shop, and I'll link that down below. I'm like, yeah, why not give these a try? I love to do grain sack stripes. So let's see how these work out for me. Now they come in 3 different sizes, so you have 3 different ways that you can stripe. I want my grain sack stripings just to be a slight accent, and it's not going to be centered. They're going to be that perfectly imperfect because I'm going to center that middle of the 3 over what that crack is. So the seat is not a flat surface, so I would be taping these down anyway, but I'm taping them down in the middle. My go-to color is always the multi-use apple barrel, and I'm using the black. And then I'm also, from Melissa's shop, I purchased one of the stencil brushes. Oh, this is definitely worth buying and having in your stash to use. So I'm using that dry technique where you take most of the paint off. So you're just doing a dry brush technique. Now, as it comes to the stencil, I'm trying to figure out, because this is not a flat object, how do I tackle this stencil? The only thing I wish the stencil would maybe, I don't know, or if it was just me, I wish it was a little bit stiffer of a plastic, but if I'm not getting paint on myself when I'm doing a project, I probably think I'm doing something wrong. So I just kind of had to shift my fingers as I was working down the stencil, making sure that especially on this 3 one, that that middle piece wasn't lifting up on me as I'm going along. So as I said, I'm not centering them to center them. I'm centering them to cover up and hide those cracks, just be a nice little accent, that perfectly imperfect. And now that my paint is dry, I'm just taking a little sand sponge over it a little bit. Just trying to, it's not as crisp a line as I'm used to, probably just user error there, but I'm just seeing if I can blend them in a little bit more and make them more shaded. I'm not redoing it. It's that perfectly imperfect, and I absolutely love the off-centered of these stripes. I don't know if I'm driving somebody's OCD crazy, but I definitely myself, I like it. Now to finish this seat up, I'm going to be doing at least 3 coats, sanding in between, of some polyacrylic. And I know I'm going to get asked why I didn't use the Rust-Oleum. Just the polyacrylic over stained items, stained wood like this is just my go-to. I like the way that it absorbs into the stain, and yeah, it's just a personal preference. You can just use whatever clear coat you want, but for some reason, my go-to is always the polyacrylic, usually, because I always will catch myself lying and grab something else, but is the polyacrylic when it comes to overstained items. Now, these sharp edges on this stool bottom is the reason I knew that this would be perfect in black, because I knew that these sharp edges, once I took some 220 sandpaper, oh my gosh, just look at the details that are just a poppin'. Now, after I get all those details popped, not only just on the outside, I do the inside of those sharp edges and around that curve that's holding all those legs in also. So now I'm just taking that sanding sponge, and the sanding sponge I would say is probably like a 300 grit. It's just a very light sanding sponge just because it's a flat area. You could use steel wool also, but today I'm just going for the sanding sponge just to rough up that black. I needed to seal it in, but I also need to open it up because the black is not my finished step. Now I'm going to use the assistance of the air compressor to get all that sanding dust that I just created the heck out of here. And then I'm going to, yep, I know y'all guessed it. We know she's going to be using the straight antiquing wax on this. I just absolutely love what antiquing wax does to black paint, how it's going to pop where I distressed and took it down to that wood on those sharp edges. So now before going and finishing up the rest of these pieces, you probably wondered how I was going to finish off their tops. Now, one of my retirement things, if you've been watching my channel and you're a regular follower, is you know that I am working through some of the hoard that I have. But of course, yeah, I kind of, I'm like, okay, I bought some new stuff, but I still have to work through my hoard. So I have some pieces of parts of some decoupage paper that I want to use for this project. And if you watched my old window turned into a mirror effect, oh my gosh, I'll try to remember to link it. That is just an awesome video. I just absolutely love how these turned out. But this was a leftover piece of decoupage paper that I had to cut off, and I am extremely happy that it is the same size as this rectangular seat. Can I tell you how God wink moment when you can reuse something that you're like, look at this, is like the perfect fit made to do this. And this is just a sequence of, I didn't even really know what I was going to do with these stools. I knew this was in my lineup of doing these stools, but not the decoupage paper part. I did not know. So also I've been playing with a lot of decoupage paper, and I've done now 2 dresser flips that I've done decoupage paper on, where I've sanded the paint off the front of the drawers and I put it on raw wood. And there's another question I get asked a lot: why didn't I paint them first before putting the decoupage paper on? There's going to be 2 different looks you're going to get from that. So today on this video, since we already have them all painted, they're underneath black, you'll see the finished product and the difference, and I'll try to remember to link, apparently I need a decoupage paper playlist, but the difference between having that black underneath and having that natural wood. So as you see here, I'm just going with some polyacrylic to attach these to the top of the seat. So I'm trying to get my hand into that Ziploc, because everybody seems to think that you need to have some type of a saran wrap or something to help smooth out the wrinkles. But really, this decoupage paper is not like tissue paper thin. It's not flat fabric thin. Even though I'm using this Ziploc, I find it a little bit more cumbersome and kind of in my way. So really for me, I probably drop it at the end of the project and just use my hand. Like I said, that polyacrylic, the Mod Podge doesn't come through it either. And I don't mind the wrinkles if there's a little bit wrinkles. And this is a smaller piece, so if you are comfortable with just putting the polyacrylic or your glue substance on the whole thing and then putting your paper down, you can go ahead. I guess I have some control issues, so I always like to center my piece first and then work from side to side. It's all a personal preference and what is comfortable to what you are doing. That way I just know that my guide is that cow's head. I got that centered. I've got some lettering I want to go for. So I just like to work from the center out. That way I know that, it's helping me get the wrinkles out. If there again, I'm not really too much worried about the wrinkles. I like that old tattered look anyway. And then look at how perfect these are. These were 2 from that mirror effect window video also that were left over. There was a 3-piece where I used the other cow that was a full face, and then it had some graining sack, some ticking that was on the bottom of it. But I'm like, oh, I absolutely love this. Now I'm playing around with them, deciding, do I just want to cut the circle part out, or do I want to leave some of the wording? And the stools are two different sizes, so the one that has the cow on it right now is a little bit bigger. And you would think, oh, the chicken is bigger than the cow, but just the way that leaf and that wreath is at the bottom, actually that is a little bit bigger. I think I finally made my final decision that I'm just going to glue the whole paper down, and I can sand off what I don't want at the end. There we go. So I'm just making sure that I am centered. I'm going with that middle grain sack stripe there to make sure that at least, even though the paper's not, as you see, not evenly cut, just the way that the decoupage paper was, I'm not going to worry about trying to play with that now. I'm just going to go ahead and get this glued on to the top of the stool. And the same thing with the cow. I'm just going to go for that center stripe and make sure that that is centered in the middle, and then just go ahead and get this one glued on also. Now I need to just sit these off to the side and let that polyacrylic dry. Now I only put it underneath, not on the top. So now I have this cute, oh my gosh, I just love the shape of this little stool. So I want to do some more of that grain sack striping. But yeah, as you see, I am holding red in my hand. So when I did this, my vision was when I have it set in my booth, I'm just going to be putting that rooster dresser that I just did in there. And I thought, you know what? Why not have a little accent stool? Maybe somebody will buy two pieces together. And yeah, guys, I'm doing a little bit of the red. After getting measured to where center is and actually taping this whole thing down, I know that I'm going to be wearing some red paint. So yeah, you just have to figure out how. You're like, okay, make the executive decision and just get started. And because that center is so much wider, I definitely don't want the stencil moving around on me. So I'm just going to try to hold it, and yep, I'm just going to get some paint on myself, but it'll be okay. And it definitely, the black underneath is going to give this red a whole different color. The less paint you have on this brush, the better. That way that you're not accidentally slopping it underneath the stencil itself. So definitely make sure that you put some paint on the brush and you take a lot of that paint off. And as always, just do an item until you love it. And so I'm like, well, I want a little bit more striping on the top of this. I just absolutely love that black underneath that red, how it just tones it down to almost a brownish burnt red. Now I'm going to go ahead and just seal in a little bit of the spot of this red because I want to do this JR stencil, this crockery stencil on the top of it, just for a little added something more. Yes, it probably would have been good just as is, but sometimes when your vision is you want a little bit added more, then just do it because as I said earlier, do it until you love it. So I just wanted a little bit of pop, and if I would have gone back and thought about it, I probably would have done a chicken stencil on it to actually match the dresser, but then I would have had to make sure that I did the mask. So I don't think the stencil on top of this would have been working for me anyway. So that's why I'm going in with just this little just a little bit of words. This is one of my favorites of that JRV stencil crockery pack. So I'm like, yeah, well, why not do it? The thing about an item when you're painting it is it's just paint. And if somebody doesn't end up liking it and it doesn't sell, you can always paint back over it. But if I didn't seal that red in, I was afraid that my white paint on the top of this would then there be pink. So one of these stools, I am going to be testing out some milk paint. I've never used milk paint. This is the old-fashioned milk paint. And when we were on a trip away doing the IKEA trip, we stopped at a woodworking shop that sold wood products, and they also had this milk paint. So I thought, you know what, another God wink moment, give this a try. I'm not sure I've seen others do it, but of course I chose white. So it's equal parts, and I actually, when I'm doing this, I know for this video I'm only doing one stool, but I'm actually I'm never only ever doing one video, guys. I'm always working on multiple products, especially to keep a booth stocked. So I ended up mixing up the whole bag. So it's equal parts, which ended up being 4 of these Dixie cups to 4 Dixie cups of water. Now this is a funny story. This little hand mixer was for sale at my sister-in-law's garage sale for $2 years ago when I started this channel, and this is actually the first time I've actually ever, and I knew that I wanted to use it for milk paint, but this is the first time I'm actually ever trying milk paint. So I already had the mixer in my hoard. Oh, aka stash. Because it says that you thoroughly need to mix the two substances together, and you can hand mix it also, but I'd seen a lot of, it was probably Jamie Ray Vinch's channel when I first saw her use the milk paint. Which is probably the Sweet Pickins line, but that's okay. This is the one that was in front of me, and I'm a touch and feel, and I like seeing it on the shelf. So the old-fashioned milk paint, the milk paints that are a powder and then you mix it in the water, are the ones that are supposed to be chippy and they're supposed to crackle. So I thought this was a perfect piece to do this on, because this is not a piece that has a lot of details. It will not distress very well. I do know that I probably need to apply it all at the same time. So I'm just going to flip it over one fingertip on the bottom of one of the legs. And yep, I'm going to have to touch a little bit, but I know that I definitely need to get it all on at the same time. And yes, I do have it on a board and have it on a Lazy Susan. It just makes it so much easier to paint an item. As you see, it's already starting to do some of the chippiness, but unfortunately, the coverage of white is not there yet. So going into adding the second coat, I need to re-stir up what was left. All the goodies had now settled to the bottom, and now I'm going to be adding a second coat. Now the directions did say you could do 2-3 coats, but I wasn't really sure on what would happen with the chippiness. So first time ever using it, just painted right over that chippiness. And I was hoping that the chippiness was what I would see was the black that I had left and had originally painted the piece to begin with. So after 3 coats, I was trying to get the white to be a little bit more coverage. Maybe it was I should have painted it white and not been able to see the black. I'm not really sure. Maybe that's how you do it, but that's not how it said. So anyway, it just didn't have that look that I was going for, especially since I chose white, that it just wasn't covering, and it wasn't being chippy anymore into the third coat. It was being more of a crackle. So then I started to sand it, and then I'm like, oh, well, now I'm sanding the crackle smooth. So I'm like, okay, well, I got to stop doing that. So then I took a razor blade, hoping to see if I could get a little bit more off to chip, that I wasn't sanding the crackle smooth. But, we all have to be new at some time and test out products. So I'm just going for it, and we'll see if I can save this piece or not. So then decisions had to be made, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to distress some of the edges, and I'm going to get down to that black. And I know, unfortunately, it's going to take some of that crackle off, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. Remember, on my channel, I'm always going to share the good, the bad, the ugly, and not that we're going to ever get rid of a product or throw it away. We're just going to share how we problem solve. So after getting it sanded and distressed, I decided just to sit it off to the side and think about it while I was working on something else. So now I let the polyacrylic dry overnight on these. I wanted to make sure that it was good and dry because I wanted to go back in with my mouse sander to save my hand from sanding. And so I wanted this little sander. I've got some 220 grit on, so not a terribly abrasive grit of sandpaper by any means, and I just wanted it to make the decision of how it wanted to distress these pieces. And I wasn't going to go ahead, I'm going to leave it as is, that it's slightly off-centered, it's not a circle. I wanted some of that wording left. Yes, I am going to go over the top of it. I'm not going to be pushing down because I don't want to remove it, but wherever it crinkled, I want it to distress that. That's why I don't mind crinkles and wrinkles in the decoupage paper by any means. It just gives it more of an aged look to me. And then the same exact thing with the chicken. I'm just going to let this sander decide where I need to be. But now I do know on the opposite side where you don't see any of the wood or any of the black paint, I am going to have the sander take a lot of that off, so at least you see it's a little bit more even ratio of wood on each side. My vision is that, yes, I centered the paper perfectly in the center because that's what a manufacturer would have done. But to make this look old and wore and that it's been used a lot, it's that where the paper is wore off over time, where it's been sat on, where it's been used. That's the look that I'm going for. I want it to look aged. So I centered those green sack stripes perfectly, but it's okay that the paper is that perfectly imperfect. This is the easy one to sand because all I'm going to do is go around and take that. Unfortunately, I didn't hit record, but I just took the sander around that sharp edge and took that paper off. Now, before moving on, I'm going to go ahead and that's a little too much of the wood showing for me, so I'm just put a little bit of the original paint in a cup, a little bit of paintbrush, and I'm just going to gingerly go in and just get that paint. I don't mind if it goes on a little bit of the paper. If you saw my original dresser videos, that's exactly what I did anyway. So I want to go ahead and go back in. That's just a little too much over distressing, but I do love how the electric sander made the paper. Now that black paint is dry, I'm going to go ahead and put a top coat of polyacrylic on top of these now to get it all sealed in. So now that we've done the electric sander on the top to get that decoupage paper distressed, we have some more distressing to do onto these pieces. So as you see, I'm just hitting all the sharp edges. I want to see that wood. This is not yet the finished step. We're not finished quite yet, guys. I still have another step that I want to do. So I just want to make sure that this looks aged. I want to open up any top coat that's on there, so my next step will be able to be seen. And so there's a lot of details on a lot of these stools that I want to go in and distress so it looks like they're aged over time and worn. It took me 2 coats of the black to cover the sides the way that I wanted them. Now I'm going to go back in and gingerly distress. Like I said, I didn't want it to be as stressed as the electric sander, and yeah, but it did save my hand going in and using the electric sander. Maybe a little bit more work on having to repaint it, but that's okay. Now it's time to get these finished up, and yep, I'm going for that Waverly Antique Wax in the brown. Oh my goodness. So this is just going to pop all that wood. It's going to tie together any of those edges that we distressed and even tone down that white stencil that I put on the top of that red. And not only are we doing the top, but we're doing those legs. It's going to make all that where we took this time to sand and distress and show that one underneath, that's just going to pop. And there's just something about brown wax on the top of black that just richens it and elevates it to another level. Okay, here it comes, antiquing wax on the top of some decoupage paper. Now this is really going to show you what the difference is between having that black underneath or having a natural wood. And these are 2 totally different looks. The antiquing wax is going to give it that aged look. It's going to make it look like that paper has already been there, but because the black is underneath, it's going to blend in a lot more and not pop just quite as much with the natural underneath. So it's just 2 different looks, guys, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to share the second look with you since I gotten so many of those questions. So as I continuously see if I can save this little white milk painted, okay, I probably should have not. I bet you it would have worked if I didn't pick white, because white is one of those hard to covers, or maybe raw wood. I don't know. You guys can all comment and give me suggestions of how to use milk paint. But look, as I'm doing the tape, it wants to chip. That's hilarious. So it is what it is. So since I've already taken my Jamie Ray vintage stencils back into my craft room, I'm like, well, you know, I've got masking tape, so I'm going to go ahead and do some grain sack striping on this. This is my first step to saving this little stool. So grain sack striping, measure off where my center piece goes, and then laying a piece of masking tape on either side, and then taking off that middle piece because that will be where my first paint stripe will go. I am using the same paint color, the Apple Barrel Multi-Use in black, and I had my stencil brush in a Ziploc, so I didn't have that in the house being cleaned out yet, so I'm able to use that. But that dry technique, you just use a minimal paint on your brush. And then I'm just going to use my heat gun to help me dry the paint so I can move on to my next stripe. My first tape was masking tape from the Dollar Tree, and I think it's like a 3/4 inch, something like that. And so this next tape that I'm using is a 1.5 to 2 inches. I never really measure them from the Dollar General, but it's perfect to center that stripe and have enough of unpainted space. And then now I'm just putting another piece of masking tape. I like to have my next stripe be about as much as what the unpainted is. For visual, that is what works for me. So the same thing, just doing just a little bit of paint on that brush. And then since I put tape over freshly painted paint, I use the assistance of the heat gun to help me remove it. Even though I want to distress it, I want to control my distressing. So I'm going to do one more stripe, the same thing. I'm going to take that Dollar Tree masking tape and I'm going to center it over that second stripe that I did. That'll be my spacing. And then I'm going to go about half the size if I can. I always think it looks like half the size and sometimes it comes out a little bit bigger, but I just wanted another stripe. And then I'll go in with, and I want to really distress it. It's got a lot of crackle going on. I distressed it, you know, with the sander a lot earlier, so I'm not going to push down heavily. I'm just going to let the sandpaper, it's still that 220 sandpaper on this, and just let it take a little bit more off. And I'm going to try a waxing on this, so I don't want the wax to remove that apple barrel paint, so I'm going to give it a nice generous coat of some clear coat on the top, just the Rust-Oleum and matte. So even though I think your focus is now on those grain sack stripes and you can't see how uneven the white paint is, so in my hoard that I'm going to have standby, I'm going to have the Jolie black wax, I'm going to have the finishing wax. So I'm going to go ahead and go right in with that black wax and start adding some of the wax in and letting it upgrade this color. And then if it gets too black, I can always take the clear wax and take the excess off. That way you have a little bit more control when it comes to waxes. Just because what you put on, you can always take more off. So I actually had just used the black wax on a 2-piece broken in half china hutch that Chris just did to elevate it. So I'm like, hey, I wonder what this would do to this. I don't do a lot of waxes other than the antiquing wax. I had this black one in my hoard a little bit. So it is kind of fun to have stuff in your stash and be like, I wonder if I can change it, because I definitely wasn't happy with the look. And so then I just took some of that natural wax and toned it down. So now on these legs, this is a little bit more time consuming, so I'm just going in because that milk paint, I didn't seal it because I wanted it to absorb in, and it was just, it actually took a lot of the wax and it was not smooth to go on. I think it was the milk paint, but that's okay. So I just took my time. I just tried to get every piece of it covered with the black wax. Now that I got it all applied, you can definitely tell where the sander had made it smooth, and so it didn't take the wax just quite the same. But I'm like, okay, just trust the process, Yvonne. Okay, well, I don't even really know what the process is, guys. I'm just making this up as I go, just trying to save this stool. So I'm taking some of that natural clear wax now and going over the top of it, trying to blend it smooth. Okay, are you bored with me trying to save this stool and think, Yvonne, just throw it off to the side? But I'm going to my old faithful. If my antiquing wax can't make me love this piece, then yep, I'm going to have to redonate it and make somebody else work on it. But I don't know how many of you all think that are a fan of the antiquing wax going, okay, if I don't like it, antiquing wax will always make me like it. So I'm just going in with some antiquing wax. All these waxes are pretty much still wet. They don't have any time to cure. And of course, as you see, I'm testing it out on the bottom of the stool first, so if I don't like it, I can take it right off. As I was applying it, I definitely loved how it toned it down. I was getting more of a grainy look with it. It was definitely going into that crackle a little bit more, blending on where the areas that were sanding. But as you see, there's some space here that I'm like, I just can't get that rag into, and I don't want that bright white showing, so I'm just dipping it straight in with a paintbrush into the antiquing wax and making sure that I get that filled in. And then just working around this piece. I do like, yeah, guys, I've never done 3 different waxes on top of each other, but I'm glad that I had all these in my stash and tried to be able to fix it because I definitely am liking it.
Okay, what did you think? These, you go into a project with a plan, like that swivel stool, and like, I'm just gonna stain the whole thing. Well, then when I got it done and sanded and bleached, it was 2 different types of wood, and I knew that once I stained it, it wasn't going to look the same. So I absolutely love it with the black bottom, and then that decoupage paper. I love sharing the technique with you of how it changes the underneath of the decoupage paper, because when I did my dresser flips, everybody's like, why didn't you paint underneath? Well, 1, you're wasting paint. You don't need to. It's going to stick. And then 2, it changes the color of what the paper is. So I'm glad that I got to show the variance of what that is. And then that milk paint. Okay. Well, I'm sure it was because I picked the lightest color there is white. So, and we all know that white doesn't usually cover in 2 coats. And maybe if I had raw wood, or maybe in what ifs, a whole bunch of what ifs. But you know what? I do love the final look. It has that aged barnwood look to it and the crackle. So yeah, I've done black wax, I've done antique wax, but I've never actually done them together. So it was kind of fun to try. Yeah, it took me longer than I wanted to, especially for the recost that I will get for this one if it sells. I hope somebody runs across it and likes it. Kind of reminds me of stuff that's at Hobby Lobby. Nope, it's not my normal looking piece of furniture, but hey, it's fun. It's fun to try new items, new techniques. And it's not that I'm not going to ever try milk paint again, because I know you all will help me in my comments, just like you did chalk paint, and help me learn how to use milk paint. So I thank you so much for watching today's video. And as always, give me a like if you like this video, and a quick comment if you can help me out with some milk paint and what your favorite item was today. And if you're checking out our channel for the first time and you liked what you saw, hit that subscription button along with the notification bell so you know when we've uploaded a new video. And I'll see you next time, guys, with what I'm up to. Bye.